On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the floating storage and offloading facility Safer, moored about 9 kilometers off the Red Sea coast of Yemen, has officially offloaded its 1.14 million barrels of light crude oil thanks to the salvage company SMIT Boskalis. Therefore, Safer is safer for everybody. Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So I want to take a moment and go through this process because there's a big announcement SMIT Boskalis had in conjunction with the United Nations to make this vessel safe. And the problem has been this ship has sat there for a long time. And what do I mean by a long time? So the ship in question is a modified tanker that was converted into this floating storage and offload facility, and I'll talk about it in some more detail here in a minute. But the ship was built back in 1987. It is a single hull tanker, and since 2015, it has been largely abandoned and deteriorating. And that has been a huge problem. This ship, off the very edge of the Red Sea, the very end of the Red Sea, has feared that it could break apart, start leaking oil, and therefore create a huge environmental damage and actually impede the flow of traffic going up to the Suez Canal. So we're going to break down the story, take a look at it, and give you the details behind it. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right. So this image gives you an idea of the scope and scale of what we're talking about here. So the vessel in the middle here, this is the Safer, a converted oil tanker. What a floating storage and offloading facility is in the nutshell, is a temporary holding tank that's connected to shore by a bottom pipeline. So if you look at the vessel, here's Safer, your normal kind of oil tanker that you would have seen floating around in the 1970s. She was built in 1976. And then off the bow here, this large facility is hooked to a set mooring point, which is anchored. There are a series of 4 anchor chains that go down to the bottom, and the vessel actually rotates around this central position. The vessel will swing on that point, and through the middle here is a pipeline that goes ashore. And so the concept being is you pump oil out, you fill up the tanks of the Safer. The Safer doesn't go anywhere. It is permanently moored here. But then you bring other tankers alongside, you fend off with these large Yokohama fenders, and then you pump the oil, gasoline, whatever you're using here into the vessel. This is a process that's used around the world. However, the problem with Safer was the ship had been there since 2015 with no maintenance done on it at all. It basically had just been abandoned because of the civil war that was going on in Yemen with the Houthis. And so for 8 years, the ship sat there, and it took a concentrated UN effort to put together the funds to get this oil off. You didn't just need to pump the oil off. You needed to bring in a salvage company, and this is where the company of SMIT Boskalis comes in. SMIT Boskalis, they did the salvage of Ever Given, they did the salvage of Ever Forward outside of Baltimore, and they just recently did or ongoing the salvage on Fremantle Highway. So this is a flyer or a PDF that SMIT Boskalis did, and I'll have a link over to their site. They have an entire webpage dedicated to this salvage operation. This is the location of FSO Safer right here at the very bottom of the Red Sea, about 4.8 miles off the coast. The vessel holds about 1.14 million barrels of oil. A barrel is 42 gallons. So it gives you an idea of the amount we're talking about here. So one of the big fears on board this vessel was not just the 1.2 million barrels of light crude oil was on board, but the ship's inert gas system had gone offline. And with the inert gas system going offline, that meant explosive vapors were building up inside the tanker. Modern tankers are extremely safe. If you go back to the 1960s and 70s, there were rashes of oil tankers exploding during loading and unloading. We nullify that by installing these inert gas systems that basically lower the oxygen levels within the fuel tanks so that even if you get a spark or a flame, you can't combust. There's not enough oxygen to support it. Well, those inert gas systems had gone offline. And then not only that, the tanks have begun to decay. Being sitting in salt water with oil in them, you will start seeing them rust and decay. And the big fear was this ship was going to break apart and potentially begin to spill the 1.2 million barrels of oil into the Red Sea. So back at the end of May, the Endeavour, this is Boskalis' multi-purpose support vessel, arrived on scene alongside the Safer. And there was a lot of preliminary work that had to be done before they can do anything. So the crews on board had to wear SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, to walk around because of the atmosphere and the fear of toxic gases. You never know what you may walk into or what may be venting from pipes. So they conducted an inspection of the vessel, including the pump and the engine rooms, to get an assessment of whether or not they can use the ship's facilities to pump it off. And they determined later on not to use them. They will actually use portable hydraulic pumps to pump out the vessel. They inspected the mooring to make sure that the mooring arrangements were good. They're going to have to bring an empty tanker alongside, so they're going to put more stress on the mooring. They needed to make sure that was all right. And they needed to assess really the transfer operation, how they'll go about doing it, including loading on the deck of Safer a lot of equipment. You needed to bring on cargo lines, portable cargo lines, inert gas systems, generators, compressors, manifolds, all the equipment that you would need to conduct this transfer. They had to assess what condition the tanks were, so they had to stabilize the tanks and really get a good idea what was in the tanks. Was it oil? Was there water in there? What type of cargo was in there? They had to determine the atmospheres, ensure they had inert gas. They brought on portable inert gas systems to pump into the tanks. So each of them needed to be checked, inspected, declared they were safe, and then they envisioned that the entire operation would take approximately about 16 days. So the operation was extremely elaborate that SMIT Boskalis undertook. And you'll see here a video of them with divers going over the side to inspect the hull of the vessel, to look at the mooring systems, the amount of engineering they had to bring on board. They had to get through the material that had built on the side of the hull to determine the integrity of the hull. It was a large, expansive, and they had to work in a pretty inhospitable environment off the very edge of the Red Sea. Once they undertook that, once they were able to assess the condition of the vessel and determine that they were in a good position to go ahead and start the operation, then they could bring in the tanker that the UN had procured. Once they're able to bring that tanker in alongside, they can begin the pumping operation. So the UN procured a tanker. They actually went out and bought it. If there's a questionable issue here, it is the UN buying a tanker. The tanker is the former vessel, the Nautica. They renamed it the Yemen for this. They brought it alongside, moored it up against the Safer, and on 25 July, they began the process of pumping off the oil, doing the transfer between the two vessels. They had two SMIT tugs on location there, the SL Aden and the SL Mannequin, to provide the docking and also ensure that no problems happened during the operation. For the ship-to-ship transfer, it was going to take about 19 days. They're using fairly small pumps to do this. They want to pump very slowly, have to make sure they maintain a even trim on board the Safer. They don't need it listing too much. At the same time, they have to inspect the oil coming out, make sure they're getting oil out, they're not having leaks. It was estimated it was going to take about 19 days using the portable hydraulic pumps they have on board. As they're pumping out, they have to keep inserting inert gas into the tanks to ensure there's not a buildup. One of the big problems, as I mentioned before in the past, has been explosions on board vessels during these sorts of operations. So the pumping started on July 25th. That was the initial aspect of it. By July 11th, they had been able to transfer the 1.1 million barrels of oil off the vessel. They declared the operation a success. However, they did have had one other element that had to be done, is that because this was crude oil will adhere to the side of the tanks inside the vessels. You have to do a process called butterworthing, where you actually lower a sprayer into the tank and you pump crude oil through it. It rotates around and you're able to spray the tank and get any remnants of the crude oil off the sides of the tank, and then you have to actually physically go in and scrub and clean the tanks. So that would be the last process here as they remove the oil from the Safer. Here's the current position of the Yemen, just off the coast of Yemen, still moored up there against it. It's estimated it's going to take about 17 days to do the tank cleaning, get the remnants of the oil out of the vessel. Then the oil tanker, the Yemen, will sail to a port to offload it. Not exactly sure where it's going to go yet. I'm also not sure what the UN is going to do with its own tanker now. I'm not sure if it's going to keep it or sell it, put it back on the open market and sell it. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure I didn't lease one. I really not, or charter one. But this is what they did. But I think really the heroes in this story are those who helped raise the money to avert this disaster. There was a huge program put on by the UN to kind of raise money for this. And then obviously the crew from SMIT Boskalis that did the salvage on the vessel. Absolutely a tough job to do on a ship that's been sitting there for 8 years, that was not in the greatest condition to begin with. And to safely transfer that amount of fuel and prevent an environmental disaster is a great success, in my opinion. I hope you enjoyed today's video. It's always good to get some good news for a change in maritime shipping. We do a lot of bad news here, but every now and then we got to have some good news, and this is a great one to have. If you enjoyed today's video, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you know something more about this operation you want to add into the comments, please do so. I am by no means an expert on this. I am going by what SMIT Boskalis has put out and the information I've been able to get from my contacts in this operation. But again, if you have firsthand knowledge, always glad to hear about it and to add to the network that is what's going on with shipping. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off.